Welcome to Pesto Comics Audio Edition. This is the entry for September 18th, 2024. You can take the kid at a film school, my experience at the Toronto International Film Festival, and why I still go after 20 years. Before we get into it, I got a few quick updates. This is the final few hours of From Parts Unknown number 1. If you're watching this as soon as it hits your inbox, there's just about 17 hours left to back the campaign. The pages I've been getting from Daniel for issue 3 now are the best I've seen yet. I'd love for as many people as possible to see it. And it starts with issue 1. As of writing this, which was on Monday, 4 days from the end, we're still about 9 backers away and just under $300 Canadian short from hitting both stretch goals. I'm hoping we've already hit those stretch goals by publication time, but if not, won't you help us out and get everyone some cool freebies? Hamilton Comic Con this weekend. If you happen to find yourself in Hamilton, Ontario, come see me at Table 52 in Artist Alley. I'll be tabling with my brother. If you read the launch post for From Parts Unknown, you know that he was a big influence on getting this whole project started. But it does mean a lot to me for him to be there while we wrap this whole campaign up. I won't have From Parts Unknown ready for that event, but I will have copies of everything else, including Crazy Latte Thing Called Love, Unlimited Udo, and Stay Cool. I'm very lucky to have a corner table this go-around, so it should be very easy to find me on your way to the food court. If you're checking out the exhibits on the outer perimeter, be sure to swing by and see Roberto Villacava at table 10. Speaking of Roberto, he and I have a big project we're launching together, a new podcast called the Instant Ink Comic Book Podcast. The first episode launches on September 20th at noon. This podcast is more than just a chance for us to talk with fellow indie creators while they sell their books. There are a few podcasts that already do that very well. We're going a different route. Each episode, we create something live during the podcast itself. Though the podcast isn't live, but the creation of the work is. We use some randomly generated prompts, unknown to anyone involved before the recording, and create a one-page comic live on the spot. We'll brainstorm and write it together, then Roberto draws and letters it to give us a completed work. These were a ton of fun to record, and we already have a few banked. They'll be coming out every Tuesday and Friday at noon, Eastern Standard Time. If you're interested in being a guest, reach out and I'll work with you to book some time. It's not limited to comic book writers or artists either, but anyone in a creative field that has something to say. And now, my favorite time of year. I've been going to the Toronto International Film Festival for 20 years now, and I can't believe how time flies. I'm including the pandemic version of the festival though, where they stream the releases to watch at home. It started in my often brought up film school days. Our director, because of course he was a director instead of a dean or president, used to get a ton of comps to screenings. He would offer them to anyone who was interested, so of course I took him up on it. My first experience at TIFF was in what used to be called the Ryerson Theater, with a film called The Machinist at a Midnight Madness screening. It starred an emaciated Christian Bale right before he would put on the Batsuit. In fact, he didn't even make it to the screening because he was in the midst of shooting Batman Begins, another pivotal and terribly underrated film that brought me to where I am today. It was thanks to this screening that I found myself at TIFF every year. Not just at Midnight Madness screenings either, but everything. I was seeing just how wide and expansive the world of film truly was. We had good video stores, RIP Queen Video, that would broaden your horizons a bit if you let them, but it was nothing like going to TIFF. Even in class or those video stores, it was still the same handful of films that everyone would recommend to watch. TIFF was the only way to really see what was happening outside of the mainstream. It takes some bravery to walk into a picture with little more than a screen grab and a fawning, and usually elusive, right up from the program director. You don't know if you're gonna have a transcendent experience or squirm in your seat until the credits roll. Sometimes, you might not even make it that far. To me, that's what TIFF's all about. When it comes to electronics, I'm a first adopter. I like to have the newest and coolest gadgets, and I feel the same way about films. Living in Toronto being a film buff, it would be an absolute shame if I didn't go to TIFF every chance I had. You've changed TIFF. That said, it's been a lot harder to do. Not only do you have to get a membership if you plan on getting tickets at all, but memberships are tiered by how much you're willing to give. There's also fewer of those deals that helped me as a young, broke fan discover the festival and really fall in love with it. Some would say that started with the dawn of the festival tower. I don't know if it's just that or if it's just the way things have been happening with everything lately. Everything is more expensive, everything is more exclusive, and yet everything is still packed. I don't go to as much as I used to because of this. I'm a lot more judicious and a lot less experimental than I used to be. I used to take a week off to watch up to 20 movies during a festival, as many as I could possibly fit in a week based on the show times. Now, unfortunately, I find myself being very, very selective. This makes it hurt even more when something I thought was going to be good doesn't really play out that way. Those few screenings are very precious. The good news? The balance of what I watched this year was actually great. What I watched this year: I, the Executioner. My first film of this year's edition of TIFF started with a sequel. I had seen Veteran at TIFF in 2015, so I was excited to see the follow-up. I wish I could say the same for the crowd. Given it was a Saturday night, I was really expecting a higher energy TIFF crowd for this. They were mostly sitting on their hands throughout. Nonetheless, I, the Executioner did not disappoint. The action and the twisting plot really paid off. You're really led into the mystery very early on, but how it plays out still manages to keep you guessing until the very end. I really enjoyed this one. Just like Veteran, it bounces between humor and dark thriller a little too easily at times. In a similar way, the split diopter shots were used liberally, which makes it really difficult to know where to focus. Relay. I was not ready for Relay. It's the best film I've seen at TIFF in years, and I mean it. It's a thriller like they don't make much anymore. The paranoia, the twists and turns. Some of it might be a tad predictable, but it does its best to use your preconceived notions against you. That's exactly how Riz Ahmed's character, which his name in the film is actually a spoiler in itself, gets away with as much as he does, along with those chasing him and his clients. There are a couple of plot points that don't entirely feel earned, at least at first. Looking back on it, you can actually see where those seeds are planted. I think watching Relay a second time might actually increase the enjoyment rather than exposing the plot holes. This is one I'll remember the feeling of for years to come. The TIFF-style audience was back for this one too, laughing and cheering, albeit too eagerly at times. I have so much to say about this movie, but I can't without diving into spoilers. Just know that it's worth your time, and it won't feel like a lot of time either. The pace is relentless. Else. As much as I complained about not being able to get tickets to as many shows as I want, being a TIFF member, I do get the odd ticket thrown at me. This is really the only place where I experiment because I go to these movies completely blind. And that's what happened with this film, Else. I definitely wouldn't have picked it based on the description and the screen grab, but being a Midnight Madness pick, I knew what I was in for to a degree. The director came out before the movie for a quick introduction that became a long, drawn-out introduction. Looking back at it, it was a good barometer for how this film was actually going to go. Every time the film stumbled upon a good point, or even a very touching moment, it didn't seem to know how to get out of its own way. I couldn't help but feel like it was just trying to hit some kind of runtime rather than actually make a point. Not to mention, it had a feeling of being too soon, as much of it was about a pandemic and a subsequent lockdown. I don't think that topic is untouchable. There's lots that we can say about what we all experienced for years to come. The problem is, this didn't have much to add. Friendship. You really have to be a fan of Tim Robinson's kind of comedy to enjoy this movie. One filmgoer really wasn't a fan and wasn't shy about it at all. She walked right up to the director, Andrew DeYoung, and very loudly said that the film was awful. Truly awful. Many of us in the crowd thought it might be a work or she was a plant, and I'm still not 100% sure that it wasn't, but it was a unique experience in the 20 years of my coming to the festival. I also happen to disagree with her opinion. I enjoyed it very much. I thought it was an interesting take on the Tim Robinson style of comedy. Everyone in the movie was playing it absolutely straight, except for maybe Tim Robinson, who was his usual self, though arguably he's always playing it straight. One scene in particular warrants avoiding spoilers as much as possible. The shock of it alone makes it an absolutely hilarious scene that's a true, unexpected highlight. The only knock I have against it is that you might kind of see where it's going, even with how crazy and absurd it all gets. Though, it's still one of my favorites of TIFF this year. Escape from the 21st Century. Imagine Scott Pilgrim vs. the World or Everything, Everywhere, All at Once, with half the inventiveness and none of the heart. That's what you get with Escape from the 21st Century. It almost doesn't know what it wants to do from scene to scene. Is it a love story? Is it a sci-fi movie? What am I watching? I'm all for crazy off-the-wall romps, but this one doesn't give you anything to tether to. It tries to by having a romantic angle that weaves through it, but the love interest, Yang Yi, is nothing more than a trophy. She barely has any character, either in the past or in the future. The secondary love story has a little more depth, but even then, the character changes so much in a way that feels completely unwarranted and weird. Not to mention, this film has the most false endings I've seen in recent memory. Needless to say, I wasn't a huge fan of this one. The Order. Usually, I ignore the blurb from the program director and all of its hyperbole, but this time it was spot on. Jude Law puts on a performance like nothing I've seen him in before, and I'm truly a fan of a lot of his work. This is almost an old-school detective flick, but not entirely. It's slower paced, but in a modern way that never stops too long before the next car chase or gunfight. It's never in a hurry to reveal anything, while still giving you moments that let you feel a step or two ahead of everyone involved. If I had any complaints, I feel like a couple narrative arcs just fall flat. Characters show up, not to be heard of again. Others have an abrupt change of fate, Perhaps that's a symptom of being based on a true story. The Cut. I love me a good boxing movie, and The Cut is a good boxing movie. It's not a great one, but at least it has a unique take on the genre by focusing nearly exclusively on the most dangerous part of professional fighting by far, the weight cut. It does a little too much in showing the tragic backstory by hitting the same note so many times that it becomes tedious. None of that takes away from the final act that subverts nearly every expectation you might have. Things go off the rails in so many unexpected ways that it stuck with me well after leaving the theater. Not all in a good way, though. Alright, so let's stack them. When I used to have to do stacked rankings at my corporate job, I absolutely hated them. You can't compare employee A to employee B on the same criteria so easily. Everyone had different strengths and weaknesses, so it wasn't clear when everyone wasn't doing the exact same job. The same can be said for these films. Some were premieres with eager crowds, and others were later in the week with a lethargic group. Some were hilarious comedies, others were gritty dramas. But at the end of the day, they all played at TIFF, and no one is losing their jobs over this, so let's have some fun. My totally subjective, unqualified stacked rankings of my TIFF films. Number 1, Relay. Number 2, Friendship. Number 3, I, the Executioner. Number 4, The Order. Number 5, The Cut. Number 6, Else. And, coming in last, number 7, Escape from the 21st Century. And there we go. I feel like after going through all these films, this isn't too much of a surprise. The good news is, I'd say the top 5 were all actually excellent. Only my last 2 had me squirming in my seat. It didn't help that they were in the wee hours of the morning, but so is I, the Executioner, so that isn't a disqualifier on its own. In summary, with all the concerns I've mentioned at the beginning of this post about how the festival has changed, a good year like this is what I needed to remind me of why I go to TIFF every year. It's hit or miss at the best of times, but there have been a few years where I just didn't have much to get excited about. That changed this year. I hope, in vain, that they'll do something about the prices or how they show the films. I'm more than happy to miss out on Q&As or just be left with some kind of YouTube recording after the fact. It means I get to attend the films I want to see. TIFF is fun because it's a populist festival. And $40 to $100 for tickets to a 2-hour movie shows that it's morphing into something else entirely. There needs to be a refocus in getting the regular public into screenings too. It doesn't mean you can't have your red carpet galas, but give regular schmoes a chance to go to the Cineplex and join in on a buzz. But I'll be back as always. And that's it for this week. Let's talk about what we have coming up next. September 25th, To the Hammer and Back Again, tabling at Hamilton Comic-Con. And October 2nd, Postmortem from Parts Unknown, an in-depth look at the 4th Pesto Comics campaign. And October 9th, Don't Skimp on the Pulp, Why I Admire the Pulp Era, and launching Big Smoke Pulp Volume 1. Did you go to TIFF at all? What did you watch? Did you find anything interesting? Do you disagree with what I enjoyed or didn't enjoy? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to talk to you about it. And one more time, I gotta mention, From Parts Unknown has just hours left, so if you haven't supported it yet, please check it out. Even if you don't read comics, we do have a grab bag that you can get some bits and bobs from all the campaigns, stickers, magnets, bookmarks, all kinds of things. So I'd love it if you check it out and just, lend your support. Let's get everybody those stretch goals because I'd love to really pack everybody's package and get that to them. And if you didn't get your podcast fixed or you want to hear me talk in your ear a little bit more, check out the Instant Ink podcast. We're coming out twice a week, every week. We have episodes banked for a while yet, but we'll have some really cool art and things to share, and we do all kinds of things. We talked about business, we talked about creative endeavors. It's been really fun, and I'd love to have you there and join us. So check us out on YouTube, the Instant Ink Comic Book Podcast. And until next time, I'll talk to you next Wednesday. Thank you very much.